Hey everyone, I want to take a minute and talk about something that's been coming up a lot in my conversations with Shopify merchants lately, and that's all about fulfillment. And if you're doing over $1 million in revenue, I know that's a lot of people that are listening here today that are at that kind of level, and you're still packing boxes yourself, or maybe you're wrestling with a warehouse partner that's kind of holding you back, you're probably leaving money on the table. And I see this all the time. Brands hit their kind of first scaling wall because fulfillment starts to become this almost massive bottleneck and eats up a lot of time and a lot of energy. That's why I'm excited to have ShipBob as a sponsor of today's episode. They've got over 60 fulfillment centers across the US and Canada. I believe they're in the UK and the EU, Australia. They're all over in all the hot spots where likely your customers are, which means customers actually get their orders faster while you save on shipping costs. Here's what I really love. Many brands, like one particular, like Bloom Nutrition, for example, doing hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue and literally only have a team of 2 people that are handling operations. And all of that is because ShipBob is taking care of everything from the post-purchase experience. And with all the recent kind of tariff changes that we've been talking about, they've got this foreign trade zone warehouses that you can actually help you defer these duties until you actually ship the product. So that's a huge cash flow benefit. And so if you're ready to, I'd say, get your time back and maybe scale without the operational headaches, then you should head over to shipbob.com. You can mention e-commerce Fastlane. They'll give you like a free analysis. They're going to show you exactly how much you could save while delivering your products faster. So trust me, it's worth the conversation. Head on over to shipbob.com. And now, let's get on to today's episode.
You're listening to E-commerce Fastlane, the podcast show to help you build, manage, grow, and scale a successful and thriving company, powered by Shopify. Listen to real conversations with partners and subject matter experts as they share proven practical strategies, platforms, and the best Shopify apps to help you accelerate your business. The time is now for you to improve efficiencies, grow revenue, profit, and lifetime customer loyalty. Please welcome your host, startup founder and strategic advisor, Steve Hutt.
Well, welcome back to E-commerce Fastlane. I am your host, Steve Hutt. Now, today we're going to dive into, let's say, it's an interesting bottleneck that's happening right now with Shopify brands, and it has to do with product sourcing. We all agree to a certain degree that maybe selling commodities really is a challenging situation. And I think when you improve an existing product and make it better, more modern, with more functionality, or come up with a brand new product, I think it's interesting of how do you source a product and find the right manufacturer and get samples and start building a relationship with a supplier that can actually help fulfill your dream. And I think what's interesting too is that AI really is starting to revolutionize a lot of things in a founder and marketer's kind of playbook. And think, right now customer service is huge with AI and inventory. But I think what's interesting is that a lot of brands are still kind of stuck a little bit in the Stone Age when it comes to like finding and negotiating with suppliers. And the challenge is like there's a language barrier typically, and then there's a time zone challenge. There's emails and phone calls and all these manual processes, and it really can take months. And I think that's the reason why I have my guest on today, Anthony Sardane. He's the CEO and founder of a company called Cavella, and it's CAVELA, Cavella.com. They literally are the world's first kind of like virtual sourcing agent. It's fully automated. It's pretty incredible what he's done. He's got like a couple 100,000 suppliers built into his network across 40 countries. I don't want to give away what the platform is because it's best to always hear in the founder's own words about the problem they're solving. But I just would like to welcome Anthony to the show.
Steve, thanks so much for having me.
I did a tiny bit of research before recording today, and it's like product sourcing just as a function of a growing or a new direct-to-consumer brand or company. Sourcing is not anything new, but I think if you talk to any successful founder that has created a product or improved an existing product, when I said months, I think a lot of times it can be significantly longer than that. So when was the moment you kind of realized that maybe the whole product sourcing kind of workflow is actually broken, and in the age of AI now that maybe there's a better way?
I was looking at the e-commerce landscape and noticing that a lot of e-commerce has actually been successfully automated away. I mean, it's quite easy for anyone today to spin up a Shopify account and start selling products. But there was this piece that was just upstream of selling that hadn't fully been solved and hadn't been automated. We picked up on, which is that before you can start selling something, you have to make that product in the first place. And making products, is opaque, time consuming, quite convoluted, and can take a long time, as you pointed out. To provide a bit of background, my family is pretty involved in commodities trade. So this has been a space that I've been very aware of for some time. My technical background was much more in the AI space. And so what Cavella was initially was trying to figure out how I could use some of this AI tech to solve some of the problems we were seeing sourcing. And so I'd been sourcing for a lot of friends and family and small brands. And when ChatGPT came out, I started using some of that tooling to start to automate some of the harder pieces, which were, the reach outs, going through, creating product specs and what have you. And I started seeing that as you start to chip away at the sourcing problem, language models like ChatGPT and other AI language tools really help you to go a lot faster and to essentially scale the sourcing process such that you can automate away a lot of what the pain points are and start to get very measurable wins, both in terms of time saved and cost saving. So that was the initial idea. How can I start to automate some of the more time consuming parts of sourcing? And as this project has expanded and now become a full-on company and we have all of our users using this, we're realizing that there's actually not much that we can't do with these automations. And we've been chipping away at the entire sourcing project end to end, from finding suppliers, vetting suppliers, collecting quotes, communication, sampling, QA. All of this can be really supplemented with AI to make meaningful progress both on the cost and the time side.
I see. Because I think there's going to be a lot of listeners maybe, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head about some of the tasks that have to happen to move your initial kind of vision of kind of what you want to get built and how it kind of goes through this product sourcing life cycle. And it's so interesting. And I think knowing that, I think there's new people that just don't really completely understand that process. I think there's some people who have sketched stuff on paper. As entrepreneurs, we have lots of great ideas. It's just like, where's the execution that comes out of it? Like, walk us through what like old school method used to be, because that's clearly you've automated a lot of that now through AI. But what does the old school way used to look like, from a piece of paper sketched to actually getting a product sample?
It starts with first defining what the product you'd like to have made is, and the creation of a product spec sheet, a tech pack, what have you. That process of getting pen to paper, figuring out what the product is to be made, leads you to the second step, which is finding the supplier who can make it. This is the really opaque part, where how do you find a supplier who can make the product you want to make at a price point and typically a lower MOQ, a lower order quantity that you're looking for when you're starting a brand or starting a new product line, that is reliable, that is communicative, that can get things done on time, no bad surprises, especially when these suppliers are typically overseas. So you start with your product spec, you have an idea of what the product you want to make is, and then you're going to go on Google, you'll go on Alibaba, you'll go on some of these aggregators that everyone's very aware of, the Made in China's, the 1688s, and then it's a bit of a free-for-all. You'll get thousands of suppliers, you're going to get these sketchy images, you'll reach out to a couple dozen of them, go back and forth. It's, as you pointed out at the beginning of the episode, a lot of broken English, time zones make this complicated. You start to chat over Alibaba chat, it goes to email, it goes to WhatsApp, to WeChat, and you're handling all of these sort of disparate conversations. There's no organization, there's no clarity. You're kind of trusting that one of these will work out. Eventually, you go through the process of getting those first samples made. You receive them, you're inevitably disappointed as you forgot to specify something in your product spec, or the supplier overpromised. And then you'll go through iterations of that, finding different suppliers, doing different iterations of samples until you can place an order. Finally, you're going to place that order and, it arrives at the warehouse after several delays, issues with the freight forwarding, and you realize that some issue in the production. The samples looked great at the end, but the final product doesn't actually match with what you were promised as the supplier, cut some corners to save on some costs and maybe make some deadlines. And, you just go through iterations of that. And so that's why a lot of brands, once they've landed on a supplier, typically have a set it and forget it approach. A lot of brands will have a bit of PTSD when it comes to setting up their supply chain, that once they're done, they're like, all right, I have my supplier. It may not be the best supplier. I probably am paying a little bit more than I should be, but it's something that I don't have to worry about. When we started looking at this problem, we just realized that a lot of it doesn't actually have to be this way. If you put in place the right operational protocol and you have technology that can supplement and aid you in that process, you can do all the checks, all the optimizations that allow you to make sourcing feel a lot more, I hesitate to say fun, but I do think it can get a lot more palatable.
Yeah. You use a word and you're calling it like a virtual sourcing agent. What does it actually mean in practice? Can you walk us through maybe like a real example? Like, let's say, I don't know, someone wants sustainable yoga mat. What would happen when I submitted that sort of request, like through Cavella?
What we've built a platform that sits on top of AI agents. And so, AI agents are going to become a little bit more mainstream over the coming months and years. But you can think about it as, if you have familiarity with ChatGPT, well, what if ChatGPT could not only just answer questions, but it could also take some actions? What if ChatGPT could answer emails for you? What if they could browse the internet for you and start to take some actions, right? That's essentially what AI agents do. They have a set of instructions and they're able to do everything that a person with a very clear set of instructions could do. You could ask an AI agent to go and comb through every database of suppliers and check for suppliers that have made this type of product before. You could ask the agent to verify that they have certain certifications. You could collect those certifications and run them against a database that confirms that those certifications are valid. You could then ask the agent to shoot a message to the supplier asking them if they're able to handle the types of MOQs that you're looking for, what their typical price point is for the product description as you have it. A lot of this work is high effort, but it's not necessarily complex, which is why AI agents are so well adapted to it. And the benefit is, once you have all these processes automated, you get some really big returns down the line. So where a lot of brands get hung up is that, they're going to reach out to 10, 20 suppliers perhaps, and then they're going to have a couple of those quotes come in. They're not going to reach out to more because it becomes quite difficult to manage all the different streams of conversation. You've lost track of who said what to who, which supplier is able to do this versus that. Once you're dealing with agents and they're doing all the work for you, it becomes very easy not to speak with just 10 or 20 suppliers, but perhaps a couple hundred. And that means more quotes. It means finding a better match for your product. And so the end result is you get a product made by a supplier who is probably better adapted to the product you're trying to make and at a cost that's a lot more compelling. It's just simple math, right? You get 5 quotes versus getting 20 quotes. You're bound to get a supplier with 20 quotes that is going to be lower than you would get with 5. And so it's just a scale issue. And that's really where AI provide benefit. It's to provide that ability to scale where as a small brand, you're just not able to because you're hung up doing 10 million other things.
Yeah. I can really see the benefits of these AI agents. This truly is a research, and the power under the hood is just as unbelievable. I use it myself internally for my own kind of like content production and fact finding and, comparing competitors and trying to figure out, topics that are important. And I can see this I can see in every industry, but it's so interesting in your particular industry, knowing that there's hundreds of thousands of possible suppliers. And as you said, even 40 countries, like there's a lot of data out there, but then all these certifications, they made something similar, just their reviews, the sentiment on the market. I think there's lots of interesting ways of gathering all these data points and then almost statistically relevantly making some good decisions about, well, hey, Steve, based on you wanting this to be built, we believe that these are the people that you need to talk to. And I think that's really interesting because then there's this kind of baked in trust that Cavella has done a lot of the heavy lifting and research ahead of time. And then it turns out to be a little bit more human now, but at least you've narrowed it down to better candidates. So I love that.
It's really getting that short list to You might still want to reach out and build a relationship with those suppliers, but being able to have a much more effective funnel means that that short list that you land on is a lot more attuned to what you're trying to build than what you would otherwise manage.
I want to make a slight pivot to, fortunately, tariffs. Obviously, it's back into the spotlight right now with Trump's kind of second term and, all these crazy policies and stuff that are happening right now. And so how do you think a brand should kind of, I wouldn't say rethink about their sourcing? Because like, are you giving any advice right now currently to your clients on like China maybe versus kind of like alternative other regions?
I think that we're now at a slightly more calmer stage of the trade war, I hesitate to say, but I think about those first weeks and first months, we were seeing a lot of those brands trying to navigate a volatile environment. It was a lot of scrambling, a lot of reacting, a lot of trying to figure out what was going on. So the advice that we were always giving was sort of broken down into this short term, medium term, and long term phase. The short term, obviously, being just very case by case, react however you can. If pause your orders until we have more information, try and find alternative arrangements to hold off on placing an order. That short term phase, I think, is now somewhat behind us, barring anything crazy happening over the next 24 hours, which is always possible. We're now at sort of that medium term, which is building contingency. A big recommendation that we've been having is brands should be actively lining up alternative suppliers in different countries and creating the flexibility to pivot quickly should conditions change. So there's this idea of a China plus one strategy. So you have your supplier perhaps in China, but you have a backup supplier, perhaps in India or in Bangladesh or in Turkey or even Mexico. And that allows you to, should things go in one direction or another, have a backup. And so you're not caught in a bad spot should things go in a bad direction. Long term, what we're advocating for is moving away from a set it and forget it mindset. Again, in a world where sourcing and creating a relationship with a supplier is very time consuming and requires perhaps even a trip to the other side of the world, that becomes quite difficult. But, suppliers are increasingly online. We have technology, AI and other technology that allows us to coordinate with suppliers a lot easier. Like you think about this idea of just hopping on a video chat with your supplier, that's something that's relatively new, right? And so what that means is that you can be a lot more agile with your supply chain and revisit it on a more periodic basis than you might have otherwise, where you'd have just found a supplier and stuck with them for the next 15 years. So instead making your sourcing strategy a bit of a living process, revisiting it with these digital tools and communication platforms rather than just waiting until the next disruption forces a change. So our recommendation has just been, in short, things have cooled somewhat, but agility and preparedness are still pretty critical. And the winners will be brands that treat supply chain strategy as ongoing and not reactive.
Yeah, less emotional. This is really great advice. Thank you for that. I'm thinking too about one comment that I think I saw it in LinkedIn that you talk about Cabela's like really cutting production costs. I think for a lot of brands, there was a number thrown around like 35% and stuff like that. And I've written some notes here about like the levers that I think that might be pulled to make this happen. And some of it we just mentioned about these AI driven kind of supplier matching. Clearly that saves just physical labor. So there's going to be some cost savings in the net overall production, at least in the initial costs of getting a sample. And then some of the things like automated negotiations and maybe lower minimum order quantities like that. I'd like to understand like where'd that number come from and how are you able to quantify that?
It's in fact 37%, and that's just purely on production costs. So what we've been doing, especially around the confusion around tariffs, is that we would see brands that had a desire to cut their production costs, typically because they were also not happy with how their supplier was making their products or what have you. They needed to revisit their financials. So we come in, we source their product again, but with an alternative supplier. And we leverage our ability to have a broader reach and to negotiate and go further down that negotiation process with more suppliers than they could if they were doing this manually. And just by virtue of having a larger set of quotes to choose from, we always hit on quotes that were significantly lower than what they were currently paying. And so on average, we found that for those brands that we pivoted their supply chain from their previous supplier to one of our suppliers, their production costs went down 37%. And so what that meant, which was very interesting on the tariff front, was that there were a number of brands who were actually paying less with us with tariffs than they were before us without tariffs. And so that was cool to see. But a lot of those savings just come purely from pure production costs. I'm talking unit landed costs are 37% lower by having a more streamlined sourcing process. And that doesn't even factor in the hundreds of hours that are saved on the actual sourcing effort itself. We're leveraging AI, but we do have people on the ground that are there to do on-site QA, that are also helping to make sure that, especially currently there's a lot happening around the tariffs, and you have to kind of be able to move when you're in a pinch, find an alternative freight forwarder, what have you. All those things we're able to create significant cost savings too, as we find an alternative freight forwarding solution to get your product in time so you can avoid the tariffs, or all these kinds of other aspects of saving money, which go beyond just the pure unit costs, that go into time saved and the labor and all the other pieces. That's not even factored into that 37%, but those are also significant savings that we're making, just cutting active sourcing hours.
It's interesting too. I remember chatting with, you're talking about like this freight forwarding situation. And I think one workaround that some folks were doing was either using Portless. I think Izzy, the founder at Portless, it's interesting what they were doing, maybe not necessarily helping people find and source product, but certainly being close to the warehouse or being a warehouse in China and being able to allow for USPS labels, like local labels being created physically in China in 5 to 7 days. The product then lands in America with a full American tracking number on it without even having to bring the product in. Now, that's a whole separate conversation likely, because I think you're more about the product sourcing and negotiations and getting the best rate. But it seems like there's two sides to it here, where it's like, let's build and find the right supplier and let's negotiate the rate. And that's one of the great things I think that Cavella can do. But it doesn't always necessarily mean having to have a certain MOQ. You could certainly have a smaller MOQ because maybe you're going to use Portless in China for your fulfillment needs, right?
We're seeing a lot of different creative solutions around warehousing and how can you get your product. What's tricky as well is the landscape is changing so quickly that with de minimis being repealed, and how does that factor into all of this too? The name of the game is not necessarily finding the solution that works. It's having agility baked in and being able to quickly move. And so what we're trying to do is focus on just, okay, great. How can we make sure that you have the best supplier for the current state of the world and the current state of your business? If we have to change your supplier twice a year because suddenly China's off the table, or suddenly your business has expanded and now you're able to handle larger order quantities, and that basically graduates you to the next level where you can access a higher tier of suppliers. We're there all along the way and able to make sure that we can grow with you and adapt to the current situation.
Very interesting. I guess it's interesting kind of how your platform works, because I can appreciate the research that goes into it and making sure that they're vetted accordingly. How do you share that trust to the merchant? Let's say I want this, vegan, environmentally conscious yoga mat manufactured. It's just like, how do I feel good that Cavella has actually given me a decent list of possible suppliers for this particular product? Because I think, number one, I've never met them, who these suppliers are. And I know it's AI matching and things like that. So I just want to make sure that I feel warm and fuzzy. I think other people are probably asking the same question, that how you handle the quality control and the kind of the supplier vetting.
There's many aspects to quality control and just ensuring that the supplier is truly compliant. When we're choosing our base of suppliers to work with, there's a number of criteria that they have to comply with. So first of all, we're inheriting a number of supplier relationships from combined number of decades of sourcing experience in the business. Everyone on the team has been sourcing for quite a long time, and we have very deep relationships with a number of suppliers. Second is there are groups of suppliers, exporter associations and what have you, that are rigorously internally vetted as well. We're not just working with just any other supplier. These have to be quite compliant. Third, looking at import-export records, you can also find which, some of these top brands, if they've worked with Lululemon, have they worked with Patagonia. These are name brands that have a lot of trust baked into them. And then fourth, we're always meeting with suppliers and visiting factories and onboarding them ourselves. So we're doing a lot of manual vetting as well, just as a triple check. But that's just the first part. We always make sure that before we place any orders, we're getting samples sent to the merchant. They can inspect the samples themselves. We do a round of inspection actually before we even send them as well. So that's an additional layer. And then finally, we have third-party QA that visits at production time that will also do everything from verifying the certifications to make sure that those are also up to date and actually exist and they're not just some doctored piece of paper. So there's several layers of checks that are happening all the way from the first contact all the way to the final order.
Amazing. And I think it adds to a lot of it too, because I went to Cavella's website. You have quite a few case studies that are public. I guarantee there's probably hundreds of other ones that you just haven't had approval yet from these brands to want to talk about the success that they're having with your platform. They call that maybe their hidden superpower, I guess, so to speak. But is there anybody you can talk about maybe that's part of these case studies here, one of the ones that are notable, or maybe even anecdotally, someone that you've worked with and you said, hey, here's what their life was without Cavella, and then they came on board with us, and then here's what great looks like for them now.
There's a workwear brand that I really like called Western Welder. They make technical workwear for not just welders, but just everyone in that sort of space. An interesting product because they make shirts, boots, gloves, pants, everything, but these have to be fire retardant, meaning they have to comply with very strict certifications, UL certifications of being resistant to fire up to a certain temperature and all sorts of other requirements. So the technical product, not everybody can make it, but they were struggling because they had their production that was based out of Peru and they were looking to cut their production costs pretty significantly. They also had some issues with their supplier in Peru around some compliance issues. So there's a lot of issues that were happening beyond the cost front, just in terms of reliability. And we came in and we found them a number of suppliers and cut their production costs by about 40%. And what that allowed them to do is that they could suddenly go wholesale, which was interesting because when you cut those production costs so significantly, there's room for somebody else to make a cut, and that allowed them to go wholesale and to expand their business pretty dramatically. So now they're in full expansion mode. And, technical product, definitely it wasn't an easy product to make, but, ultimately whether you're making welding shirts or, silk eye masks or, packaging or skincare, what have you, a lot of the processes are similar in terms of doing due diligence and how you go about finding a supplier. So this is something that we were able to tackle pretty easily, and the results speak for themselves.
Yeah, this is amazing. What do you think are some of the next steps then for those that are listening? Because I think there's two different types of listeners that are here today. There's the one, as I mentioned, maybe at the top of the show, where, they're entrepreneurial, they've sketched a few things. Potentially they want to put something together. They're willing to make at least some investment in something brand new, and they're willing to go for it. So I think there's those people. And I also think there's also a large majority of people that are listening that already have a manufacturing process already and they have product market fit. But I think, products iterate over time like SaaS, but like physical goods, they just tend to improve because it could be the garment quality, that could be the manufacturing process, seasonality. They just keep getting better and better typically, or more improved based on customer feedback. So what do you say to these two different camps? There's the new entrepreneurial people. What should they be doing as it relates to your platform? And what do you say to the people that are already, years into the business, already have a supplier? How does Cavella kind of fit into that mix?
Candidly, we're best suited for the latter group. As far as new brands that are starting, they're still in that discovery phase. They're trying to figure out what it is that they're trying to make. What we've seen a lot of small brands at that stage do, it is just to go through the exercise of prototyping, build that website, see, are people responsive to this product? Is this something that they'd be interested to pay money for? And iterating quickly on designs. What I've advocated for those brands is to try and find someone local who is able to help you make that product and just iterate quickly. That is where I think the biggest return is for the smaller brands. Once you have something that is working and that you know who you're selling to, or at least you have a pretty good idea, and you're ready to take things to the next stage, which is not to go from 0 to 1, but from 1 to N, to essentially scale. That's really where we can come in and provide a lot of value. We were able to find you the best supplier for the specific product you're trying to make. It's going to go a lot faster because we know what it is we're trying to optimize for. We're less in that discovery phase, and we can really identify the best suppliers for your specific product and your specific pain points, whether that's, reducing cost, tackling the lead time issues, you want more reliability as far as the quality, you want to add certain other features that your current supplier is having trouble with, what have you. That's really where we come in and provide a lot of value. So for those brands that are a little bit more established and they're either looking for an alternative supplier or they're starting a new line that has, a lot of that is adjacent to their existing product lines, that's really where we can provide a lot of value.
Actually, I was trying to think about the early stage people too. And like a lot of them, they can actually like finance a lot of their first run product by just going through Indiegogo or Kickstarter. It's a nice way of just figuring out if there's actually market demand or not for something, right? You get a slicked up video and some 3D rendered kind of whatever of something that you want to build. You'll know if the market likes it or not, right?
Yeah. And that's, to the point of this conversation around AI, like we've never been in a better position to do just that. You can generate mockups of a product that doesn't exist yet. You can, create copy very quickly. You can spin up a website in no time. It's never been easier to launch something.
Yeah, this is amazing. All right, so next steps for people. So if they're in that kind of mid-market, you've got product market fit and they're looking to either expand their line or improve their current line or potentially change their supplier completely just based on cost factor and revetting potentially, just asking the right question. It sounds like Cavella would be a decent solution for those that are in that camp. What are the next steps to get involved?
You can find us at our website, cavella.com, so CAVELA.com, and just put in your contact information. We have a promo code FASTLANE, FASTLANE, and that'll get you, pushed to the front of the wait list as well as a discount on your samples. That's the best way to get in touch with us.
Okay, this is lovely. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's such an exciting opportunity right now, and I love the human component, but I love the AI component. I think the research using these AI agents and stuff like that, you're building something that's very market unique. I think, those brands that are listening, I think you'd be hard pressed to at least reach out to you or someone on the team and just learn more. Use my code. Let's get to the front of the line. Let's try it out. See what this platform is all about because you don't know what you don't know. And I just appreciate you coming on the show and sharing this opportunity to my listeners.
Pleasure's all mine. Thanks so much, Steve.
All right. Have yourself a great afternoon.
Well, that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank you personally for being a loyal listener of E-commerce Fastlane. It's my hope that this podcast is offering you a ton of value through growth strategies, tactics, and exclusive insider tips on the best Shopify apps and marketing platforms, all with my personal goal to help you build, manage, grow, and scale a successful and thriving company powered by Shopify. Thanks for investing some time today and listening to the show. I'm so proud and excited that you have a growth mindset and are a constant learner. I truly appreciate you and your entrepreneurial journey. Enjoy the rest of the week and keep thriving with Shopify.